Thank you, gentlemen. Now, please recognize my friend from Massachusetts, Mr. McGovern, for
Well,
5
well,
minutes.
thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank our witnesses. Thank you for your excellent testimony. And I think it's always important to talk about how important food security is to national security. There's a lot of attention in this Congress given to China, and legitimately so. I mean, the security threats that it poses, the issue, the impact on our food security, on a whole range of things. But sometimes I wonder how serious we are about really addressing those challenges. I mean, last week we did a bill to ban TikTok because we're concerned about the privacy of our data. But we did nothing to address the security of our data on all these other social media platforms, which China could use a data broker to purchase and get that same information. When we talk about, and even on today's topic, I want to make sure that what we're doing is we're really actually doing something that's meaningful, that will actually protect our land and protect our food supply. Look, I was a co-chair of the Tom Lantos Human Rights Commission for many years, and for 4 years I was the chair of the Congressional Executive Commission on China, and I've authored the Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act and the Tibetan Policy and Support Act. I know what it means to act when we have serious disagreements with the Chinese government. Both those bills became law. And I also recognize at the same time that we have a trade relationship with China, and that is important. And we want to make clear that we don't want to seek a wider conflict. I feel like I have a little bit of a leg to stand on, when I question kind of the seriousness of much of what we do here. Mr. Daly, I'm just kind of venting here. I'm not going to ask a question, but I wanted to say I appreciated the thoughtfulness of your testimony and the expertise you bring to this topic. But in your written testimony, you mentioned the 2013 acquisition of Smithfield Foods by what is now called the WH Group, a Chinese company that, as Chairman Gallagher noted in his testimony, has ties to the PRC government. And Smithfield now controls about a quarter of all U.S. hog production, and it exports a significant quantity of pork to China, tightening our domestic supply. And I think it's appropriate for this committee to carefully consider what impact that has on U.S. food security, which is why it astounds me that we have some of my friends on the other side, led by some on this committee who talk tough on China, are carrying the water for Smithfield. Many people listening may be familiar with California's Proposition 12, which is a farm animal welfare law that outlaws the most inhumane confinement of pigs in California. 2022 polling showed that 80% of U.S. voters favor a law like Proposition 12 in their state. I'm from Massachusetts. In Massachusetts, we have a similar law known as Question 3. Now, pork producers, led by Smithfield, were unhappy with the new standards and went to the Supreme Court last year. And they lost. So now they've come to Congress to overturn the will of California and Massachusetts and dozens of other states that have followed suit. We have this bill called the EATS Act, which is the latest attempt to overturn states' rights to set their own animal cruelty standards. And now, just last week, I heard our chairman tell a news outlet that he wants a fix to Proposition 12 in the Farm Bill. We just heard the governor of South Dakota talk about states' rights and how in South Dakota she wants a state CFIUS plan. And nobody objected to that. So if nobody's objecting to a state CFIUS process, why would you object to a state putting controls on animal cruelty? And again, really at the insistence of this Chinese-owned company. And to my colleagues, I think it is kind of hypocritical to talk tough about, when it comes to the influence of the Chinese government in our food system while actively helping some of the entities that they're supposedly concerned about. So you can't just care about food security when it's politically useful or suits the business interest that you may be beholden to. It has to be all the time. And I just want to add one other thing, based on what Congresswoman Slotkin said. I want to make another point about foreign farmland ownership, which is getting a lot of attention today. You know, I'm open and certainly willing to work with my colleagues on limiting investment of foreign governments in U.S. farmland, but we have to be very careful that those prohibitions do not target people in this country based on their national origin or perceived national origin. And without objection, I'd like to submit into the record a May 2023 article in Just Security by Edgar Chen entitled, "With New Alien Land Laws, Asian Immigrants Are Once Again Targeted by Real Estate Bans." So I'll just close by saying, you know, there was a time in our history where we excluded people from land ownership based on prejudice and unfounded suspicions of disloyalty. I hope we don't go back to that. And again, I thank you all very much for your very informative testimony, and thank you, Mr. Chairman, for your indulgence.
Without objection, we'll enter that into the record. Gentleman's time has expired. I will remind you, though, that this is about ties to the Chinese Communist Party. We're not, as I said in my opening statements, this is not targeting individuals of any ethnic origin. Now, pleased to recognize, actually, Mr. Finstead for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Thompson and Ranking Member Scott, for holding this important hearing today, and thank you to our witnesses for joining us. Mr. Gackel, I want to say thank you. I'm a fourth-generation corn and soybean farmer from southern Minnesota, raising the fifth, and it makes me very happy to know we have someone like you at the helm of the American Soybean Association leading our efforts, fighting for our commodities, and quite frankly, fighting for our families and the future of our families. Nothing's going to make my life more complete than watching my fifth generation take over our farm. And that's not for me. That's for Grandma and Grandpa and great-grandma and Grandpa. And you're helping that happen, so thank you. And this issue is so important to that. So I want to talk a little bit about, you know, my perspective and hopefully hear from you. So I understand the importance of the threats that we are faced with here with the Chinese Communist Party and what it really does to farm country, and it is time for us to take this serious. We must work swiftly to move, I guess, differently and more effectively of getting most of our eggs out of the basket of China. And the best way to describe this, I will just say, I mean, look at what we went through a few years back when we were struggling to find the computer chips that were needed to start our new F-150s in farm country, our new John Deere tractors. And I tell people quite often, I'm like, now think if that was eggs, bacon, turkey, if we were that reliant from a food security standpoint in regards to, quite frankly, folks that might not like us tomorrow, and how really that shows the importance of the American farmer and how we have to continue to protect and fight for our way of life. So with that said, there's a lot of ways I think that we can maybe unwind this, but Mr. Ambassador, as you know, the White House's 2023 National Cybersecurity Strategy and the Director of National Intelligence Annual Threat Assessment both emphasized that the People's Republic of China is the most advanced, active, and persistent cyber threat to the United States. Specifically, an increase in cyber attacks targeting the American agriculture and food sector highlights a serious threat to our ag economy. As critical infrastructure sector, do you believe that food and agriculture sector is adequately prepared for and possesses the ability to respond to a major cyber attack against our key suppliers in the ag industry?
No, we are not. I know we've taken major steps to protect this from a private sector perspective. I appreciate any involvement that the government can be on this. I know there's an institute at Purdue University called the Kroc Institute that works on a lot of this because we need to make sure we can manage RIP and hold it close. But we're not doing enough yet today. And I add this. If we really think that we're going to see less digital agriculture in the future, we're wrong. It's going to continue to accelerate at a very rapid rate. The velocity will be essential.
Yeah, thank you for that, Ambassador. And just in my, short tenure running the farm, my father retired when the tractor started driving itself. My 15-year-old son plants corn till 3 in the morning because of that technology. That technology is an amazing advancement in our farm, but it's also poses a potential new threat that we haven't dealt with before. Along these lines, Mr. Daley, in January, I introduced the Farm and Food Cybersecurity Act with Congresswoman Slotkin, which would direct the Secretary of Agriculture to conduct a biennial study on cyber threats and vulnerabilities within the ag and food sector and conduct an annual cross-sector crisis simulation exercise. Due to the wide-ranging national and economic security threat that China poses to the sector, coordination between federal agencies and sharing timely, actionable threat information with private industry is more critical now than ever. From your perspective, how well is the government sharing threat intelligence with the industry, and do you believe USDA can play an elevated role in helping the ag industry prepare for future threats?
Thank you, Congressman. Excellent question, and I want to commend you on that legislation. Apologize. Thank you, Congressman, for that question. It's an excellent question. I want to commend you on the legislation you proposed. It's critical. Understanding the cybersecurity threats that are part of our agricultural community, our ability to produce is direly needed. Look, at my time in government, the intelligence sharing that I saw happened a lot with defense contractors and also within the banking community. So they were industries that sort of had the benefit of that intelligence sharing. But if you look in terms of that intelligence sharing, that cyber awareness in terms of the agricultural community and with the Department of Agriculture, it's been lacking. And your bill is extremely necessary to get it on the right track. I know the Department of Ag has just stood up an information sharing division, and they're taking measures to improve that intelligence. But given China's capabilities, and FBI Director Wray relayed this in terms of their ability to shut off our critical infrastructure, waters, power that affect our farmers and ranchers and producers, we need a full assessment. So your bill goes exceptionally toward that direction.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My time is up. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Now would please recognize gentleman from New York, Mr. Langworthy, for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and I appreciate all the witnesses for being here today. I represent Western New York and the southern tier counties of New York State along the Pennsylvania line, and I'm deeply concerned about the unrealistic plan proposed by our governor to reduce economy-wide greenhouse gas emissions in New York by 40% by 2030 and no less than 85% by 2050. This timeline simply isn't feasible for many industries in rural upstate New York, but what's particularly alarming in this plan is our governor's aggressive push towards electrification in our agriculture sector, an agenda that I believe could have very serious consequences. As you're all aware, diesel fuel plays a crucial role in powering the tractors, combines, and other equipment that are essential to our farmers. Farming is a round-the-clock endeavor, as my colleagues have said, in requiring our farmers to rely on more heavily electric charging vehicles ignores the operational realities of farming and the inconvenience of having to park equipment for hours and hours on end to charge. And with all that said, I raise these concerns because it's important to recognize that China's significant role in this sector, particularly the mineral and battery supply chains, as these are crucial components for all EV technology. If we start pushing an all-electrification agenda at the state and federal levels, we are not only hurting our farmers, we're also inadvertently contributing to China's influence and control of our entire economy. I see this as a lose-lose scenario for our farmers, for all of agriculture, and frankly for our national security. And with that, Mr. Gackel, could you discuss the feasibility and potential impacts of implementing an aggressive electrification agenda like the one New York State is contemplating, how that would impact your members? And additionally, could you also address whether pursuing such an agenda in the U.S. ag sector might lead to increased dependency on Chinese supply chains, and what that would mean to our national security?
Thank you, Congressman. Very good questions and points. I'll speak from my farmer and producer and grower perspective in rural North Dakota. There is a time and a place for electrification and electric vehicles, and that's going to probably be more widely adopted on the coast, larger urban areas. But for me as a farmer and as a producer in the middle of North Dakota, from the trucking to the tractors, the combines, rail, what we rely on to move product from our farms to our elevators, to our markets, those types of industries I think will probably be later adopters when it comes to electrification. And what we're doing, so what we have to offer in that space is as farmers, as ASA, the significant addition that we provide to the liquid fuels market when it comes to renewable diesel and biofuels. And that just, again, it's another testament of what the U.S. farmer can produce. It's an example of where we're trying to diversify markets and diversify domestic demand, so not so reliant on foreign markets, even while we try to expand those. But again, just a example there of what the American farmer is doing to transition this time period in that transportation fleet. And then the risk of relying on China for the infrastructure or the materials for further electric vehicle adoption. Like any input, anything we rely on from foreign markets, there's always additional risk there if you're not able to produce it domestically.
Very good. Thank you. Mr. Daly, I'd like to open this question up to you as well. You know, we often hear that saying food security is national security, and I'm deeply concerned that continuing to rely on China for these critical minerals puts us at a significant risk. Mr. Daly, could you also address whether pursuing an electrification agenda in the U.S. ag sector might lead to increased dependency on Chinese supply chains, thus compromising national security?
Thank you, Congressman. That's an excellent question. Currently, we're in a large deficit in this particular technology, especially given battery technology that China effectively dominates right now. So if we don't get our policy right, it creates a serious dependency that creates a real vulnerability in our agricultural production. That's why we need to focus on it, and I know there's a concerted focus on building out America's capabilities in this respect, but we just have to put the resources to it.
Very good. And I know you may have touched on this already, Mr. Daly, but could you reiterate some of the national security concerns regarding Chinese acquisitions of agricultural and other land holdings near our military bases?
Sure, absolutely. Again, thank you, Congressman, for that excellent question. As this committee is well aware, the Fufang transaction that happened in North Dakota was a serious indication of what China can do in terms of what it wants to do in terms of its placement. You know, in my experience in CFIUS and in CFIUS transactions, there's been a number of significant Chinese acquisitions where they've gone to acquire land or farmland that's near military facilities, Top Gun facilities. A number of transactions occurred in Nevada that were, you know, under the label of a gold mine that actually was meant to observe our nuclear facilities and capabilities, as well as our, in Oregon, a Rawls transaction involving a wind farm. You know, wind farm towers can be used for, devices can be put in there to see what we're doing. And the facility they were looking at, the WinBee, that would have given sight to, I mean, that was a critical facility to the United States in terms of what we were doing in defense of Taiwan. So they're strategic, they're smart, they've studied us, and they'll continue to do so. So we need to remain vigilant in terms of where our resources go.
Thank you very much, and I yield back, Mr.
Gentleman's time expired. Please recognize the gentleman from California, Mr. Costa, for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, for holding this hearing, Chairman Thompson and Ranking Member Scott. I think it's timely for a lot of reasons that I think we're all aware of. Members of this committee have gotten used to me saying, as a third-generation farmer from California, that food is a national security issue. I get frustrated, I think, along with many of my colleagues on this committee, that too often the majority of Americans don't look at food being a national security issue because we do it so well with less than 4% of our nation's population directly involved, but it is. And I think it's important that this committee focus on the danger that China poses to America in terms of its impact on American agriculture and therefore food put on America's dinner table every night. Let me just kind of give you my thoughts, and then I have a couple questions I want to ask. I really think that the best strategy for this, because China is an adversary, they are a competitor, and they are a vast market. And so regardless of what administration is in office, they have that challenge. This is an adversary. Let's make no mistake about it. Number two, we compete against one another, and I would argue they don't compete fairly. They don't play by the same rules under the WTO, and they're engaged in theft of technology and other types of efforts. But yet they are a vast market. And so how you balance those three factors for any administration is a problem. You know, the Bush administration and then followed by the Obama administration tried an effort that I thought had merit, and that was the Trans-Pacific Partnership, where you engaged other nearby countries to leverage China. I think that's far better than tariffs war that ultimately the last president got engaged in. And why? Well, everybody has leverage on a tariff war, and they just keep upping the ante. But if you want to really have an opportunity to deal with this market, if you want to have an opportunity to deal with the factors of competition and realizing that this is an adversary, I think the TTP was a far better strategy. Yes, the market access program is helpful to our American farmers and processors, and it's oversubscribed, and I have legislation that would double the funding for that. Whether or not that can come to pass with our challenges with the Farm Bill remains to be seen. So let me just ask you, Mr. Daly, for starters, your testimony focused on China and their engagement on agricultural supply chain. The pandemic, I think we really understood that our supply chain is in need of assistance at every level, and especially in agriculture. With biotechnology and plant breeding tools and other potential to help producers meet challenges by reducing greenhouse gases and emissions and foster resilience and climate change in the agricultural supply chain, what's your thoughts? I mean, because too often I think China's a bad actor. They're opaque, they're politically driven in their regulatory system, and it limits innovative technologies and their theft of American technology. And I don't even want to start with artificial intelligence and the problems with algorithms and therefore. But besides purchasing United Ag land, and we heard testimony in the earlier hearing, how do you create a fair, level playing field? In a minute or less.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Congressman. I will.
We have a time problem.
It's difficult and it's multifaceted, and you just have to take it sector by sector, issue by issue, in terms of making it a level playing field with China. In terms of we got to be smart in terms of what we address in China.
You acknowledge it's not a level playing field.
It is not a level playing field. Absolutely. The Chinese are a state-driven economy. They subsidize where they want to subsidize, and they will destroy markets and our U.S. production capabilities where they want.
Do you think in the supply chain issues, and for the rest of you, we passed the bipartisan $1.2 trillion investment in infrastructure in the last Congress, and I think when we look at our ports and harbors and we look at our supply chains, California's dairy industry is very dependent upon those feed trains coming in every week to California. But the whole essence of the supply chain and food development, production, value added, that we invest some of that infrastructure in our infrastructure?
Yeah, I think a number of bills that were passed by Congress in terms of bringing up and strengthening our infrastructure are absolutely critical. There's a lot we have to do in terms of our capabilities there.
Mr. Chairman, my time's expired, but I don't know if any of these other witnesses care to comment about how we use to improve our food supply chain and dealing with the competition of China.
Well, I think it's clear the United States is the reason we're a dominant power in food systems is because of our natural resources. We've got a large concentration of highly productive soils. We've got 14,800 miles of navigable waterways, much more than any other nation, Germany or China. And we need to leverage those resources to be competitive in the world space on selling our commodities and crops and food around the world. When I look at that infrastructure, though, I look at our dams, our locks, our ports, they're aging. And I know the infrastructure bill was supposed to make an impact there. But if you look at the Civil Society Engineers Association, they come out with reports that we really get a D rating on our infrastructure.
Well, currently, but I mean, we just provided the funding. We're now ambitiously trying to do just what you said. We're doing it in California. We're rehabilitating a lot of aging infrastructure and water. I don't know if you care to comment. My time's expired.
Just quickly, if there's time, Mr. Chairman, just to say the ag community and producers, and specifically ASA, are actively involved in promoting and advocating for investments in infrastructure, whether it's ports or rail or rivers or dams. The Water Resources Development Act that Congress reauthorizes, another important tool to help farmers and to make sure we have the necessary infrastructure to move our product and move it efficiently and sustainably.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman's time has expired. I've been notified, we are in the middle of a vote series. 3 votes have been called about 10 minutes ago. So we're going to go to one more question, and then we're going to recess. And we will be returning immediately after the 3rd vote. And so I please recognize the gentleman from South Dakota, Mr. Johnson.